Right? Sounds better than the first one.
Yeah, sounds a little deeper.
Yeah, it's a little richer sound. Great. Well, we are live. Probably everybody heard me talking about my microphone. So we're live now. I'm here today. I'm Michelle Frechette, and everybody knows my full-time day job is with GiveWP, but I am the marketing manager for Century Hosting as well. And one of the initiatives that they let me start last year was Century Cares. And centurycares.org is all about giving back to the WordPress community. And every single person that I've reached out to and said, hey, do you want to give back by doing a webinar is like, yep, where can I sign up? When can we plan this? And the last person that I reached out to was Maddy Osman. And so I'm just super pleased to welcome Maddy to our latest blog post. And we are talking, now we're going to swear a little bit because she gave me the title. I was like, ooh, can I put that out there? Well, heck yes, I can. So our topic today is about writing a kick-ass blog post. Maddy, welcome to Century Cares.
Thank you so much for having me here, inviting me, and I'm so excited to share this topic. It is one of my favorites, and this presentation that I put together is something that I only just recently updated. So if you've seen it before, it's all new.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I have to tell you, I actually don't remember how we know each other. I don't remember what our origin story is, because you're part of the WordPress community, I'm part of the WordPress community. And so it goes back to a WordCamp or a, hey, that's somebody to follow on Twitter or something. Yep. But over the years, of course, I've counted you as a friend, and I've loved the work that we've been able to kind of do together on different events and things like that. So Absolutely. It's just super awesome. And I don't know if people can see your sweater. I saw your sweater when you got up and walked away, but you have
the Windows 95 ugly sweater. I thought if nobody else would appreciate it, that this audience hopefully would.
Absolutely. I absolutely love it. When you got up beforehand to go refill your tea, I was like, we have to talk about the sweater.
I'm so glad you brought it up.
The sweater. And then, of course, I see Wapu off to the side there from I'm guessing from WordCamp.
Yeah, Wapu with the little Peruvian Inca hat.
I love it.
He's traveling the world since we can't.
Exactly. All those shoes and no place to wear them, Maddy. Look at you.
Yeah, I know, right? Soon, though. I have confidence that things are going to get better this year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you probably have something in your slides, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do. You have written for some pretty big brands, so go ahead and brag a little bit. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, if you insist. So I am an SEO content strategist, and my background's in WordPress web design. That's what I did in college. That's something that I did early on in freelancing. And then it was really through that I discovered a love of content creation. And so, later on after college, I started writing for different brands and realizing people actually would pay for this kind of thing. So it was a lovely realization, and I have since built my business around that. It's called The Blogsmith, and The Blogsmith is an SEO content agency, and we do work with a lot of WordPress brands, Bluehost, Kinsta, different plugin brands, simple giveaways. I'm trying to think top of mind. I've written for Envato before. I mean, if they work in the WordPress space, there's a good chance that I've worked with them in some capacity. And I really love this community. And Michelle, I can't wait for us to see each other at another WordCamp in the future.
Me too.
And so that's kind of what I'm focusing on nowadays is SEO content. That's everything I do.
That's awesome. Well, we know that over the last year, more and more has moved online, of course, because we've been quarantined. And even if we weren't under official quarantine, it's just best practices not to be out in the world doing a whole lot right now. And so the shift to moving online for more companies has meant that services like blogging and SEO have become so much more. So I can only imagine how busy you've been. And I don't know if you're going to talk about that a little bit in your presentation, but share a little bit about what that's looked like in the shift to having more be online.
Totally. Yeah. So it's when our initial shutdowns happened last March or so, there was a little bit of worry for a moment there to see how the supply chain would react, because it's not just one industry that's affected. It's everything that supports every industry, and there are some winners and losers and in betweens. Content, I've been so fortunate that has only exploded. And it goes back to what you were saying, which is that online businesses, they're realizing, even like retail stores that never had a website before or never had e-commerce functionality, are realizing that they want to offer ways for customers to support them and to have convenience and safety in whatever those options are, even if it's like just having the ability to pick things up curbside or, things like that. So I've been very lucky, and I have been, as part of expanding my business to being more of an agency model, I've been able to support other people too, who are writers and editors and other parts of my team. So that's the best thing about growth, is that it can support more than just me. And, I'm just really excited to see what the future looks like, and, hoping to spread the wealth and, kind of along with the idea of Century Cares giving back. That's something that I'm thinking a lot with my business this year. Like, what can I do? Because I have been very fortunate. So how can I channel what I do with my business into the greater good? So still kind of musing on that a bit, but open to anybody who has, been thinking the same things. I would love to hear from you, here on Twitter. And my handle is just @Maddy Osman, like you can see on the screen.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, before I let you kind of launch into this, I do want to ask one more kind of industry specific question. One of the industries that I noticed has gone so much more online is that restaurants have had to pivot greatly in order to keep their doors open when their doors had to be closed, if you will. And so I don't see many restaurants using blogging at all. But do you think that there's kind of an audience for restaurant blogging? And obviously there's, people who do restaurant evaluations, or I can't think of the right, like food blog, that kind of stuff. But I mean the restaurant themselves. Do you think that there's a benefit to that?
I think there's definitely a benefit to restaurants having some sort of medium where, it's social in nature, or, like constantly being updated in some way. I don't know if blogging is the right answer for them. I think it could be, depending on the goals, depending on, the resources they have available to be consistent with it. But I think, like, if nothing else, like Instagram, even like YouTube, short video clips of, meals being put together, or, talking with the chefs and like, other members of the business. There has to be something. There should be something. I don't think it's enough nowadays to just have your static web page with the menu and maybe, a reservation booking link or whatever, it looks like currently. Because, like, I'll give you an example. So yesterday was Fat Tuesday, and we don't have a whole lot of bakery options around us. And so I was wondering, like, who's going to have the paczkis, because I really like those. And, so I was looking at like a European bakery nearby, and I was looking at their Facebook, and the last time they had updated it was for Valentine's Day. And so, that's probably, more of an update than even most bakeries would do, but it did not answer my question about where am I going to get my Fat Tuesday paczkis. And so, it's like I feel like people, especially from my generation, it's like, we don't want to pick up the phone and call. We just want the information.
I know, right? It's like, show me online. Just tell me online.
Make it as easy as possible for the customer. And it's like, you're already like making them, right? Like, you're already like putting the effort into creating them. So like, snap a pic. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like, don't try to be like super strategic about it or whatever. If it's just like, that's the difference between you posting about it or not. But just, do what you can to keep people in the know about what you're doing today.
I think that's great advice. And on that, I'm going to let you go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share your screen here and let you talk. And if people have questions, please post them either on YouTube or on Facebook, and we will get them on screen for Maddy to answer. And she's given me permission to interrupt as we go through. So if you have questions, let's ask them while you have them so that we can go ahead and answer them in good time. So here we go. I'm going to mute myself and let you have the floor, Maddy.
Okay, sounds good. So if you guys want to follow along with these slides, I've dropped them in the comments, and you can also grab them on my Twitter. I pinned it to the top of my Twitter profile, which is @Maddy Osman, and you can see that on the bottom of every slide. So let's go ahead and get into it. We've already talked a little bit about me, so I won't go too much more into that. And I have a lot of stuff to cover, so we'll just kind of kick things off with the basics of how to write a kick-ass blog post. And we're going to get really granular as we get along, but it helps to start with like, what is the goal of doing any of this, right? And so for me, I want to create something useful. I don't want to just add something to the void. I don't want to take something that's already been done and maybe like rearrange some words or add a new section. It's about a lot more than that, especially as far as my clients are concerned. Whatever we're putting out there into the world, it should add value in some way. Otherwise, why bother? In defining what exactly is a kick-ass blog post, it's things like, the formatting is consistent. Things like if you use a period on one bullet point or using it on all bullet points in the series, it's stuff like if you arrange headings a certain way, do the rest of the headings follow that? Like for example, if your blog post is asking a question, is each heading an answer to that question, or are there like divergent ways that you're using headings? It's little things, but they all add up. I think that a high quality blog post that's kick-ass is long form content. And that's the reason why, and I guess to describe what long form content is, it's anything to me that's like 1,000+ words. I think of short form being more in like the 500 word range. And, those are just loose guidelines. But what I mean by saying a kick-ass blog post is long form is that there's just enough content to like adequately address the topic. And then the other thing is, does it adequately answer a reader's question? Whatever reason that person has for wanting to click through and read that post, did you solve, whatever that question was? Did you, satisfy whatever drove them to do that in the first place? And this is especially important, I think, when we think in terms of search. People are inputting a specific query. So are you actually the perfect answer to that query, or are you just trying to optimize for it and, throw something at them, but not fully addressing it? So Orbit Media is a great place to go to see examples of high quality content. And they are a web agency in Chicago that I've been following for a long time. And they put out every year this blogger survey, and basically they ask 1,000+ bloggers to share like their methodology for creating blog posts. It asks a lot of questions about things like productivity, like how much time does it take them? What are some of like the things they include? And so what's really interesting to me is looking at the results of this survey year after year, because things do change. So, 5 years ago, the answer for what's the ideal blog post length or something like that is vastly different than what it is today. And so it's something to keep in mind, to sort of follow along with trends, and to just get an idea of what other people are doing and kind of where you fall on that spectrum. It's not the be all and end all, but it's something to reference for sure. So, other ways that you can create high quality content are to, think in terms of creating the best resource possible for the topic. So being really thorough, and then going back to answering all those questions. And then it's also really important when you're creating content to not be unaware of the competition. You should be considering them as part of your methodology for structuring out your blog post. It shouldn't be something where maybe you take a quick look when you're almost done. It should really happen before you're even outlining, because that will help to determine how your article should look. And I have a lot of guidelines for how to kind of keep that competition in mind without being too inspired by it.
I do have a couple of questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, what about list posts? I know that list posts, like the top 5 or the top 8, are those still popular? And do you think that they're valuable?
I think they are. I think they've fallen in popularity because perhaps some brands and writers use it as a crutch when they don't have like a fully unique idea, maybe. Because I think we see these a lot in the WordPress world, where it's like top 5 speed plugins or, whatever. And I think in order for you to be successful, like try to look for a list that hasn't happened yet, or a unique way of putting it together. Like maybe there's some specific insights you could share that other list posts aren't getting into. For my writers, whenever we're working on any sort of like listicle type thing, I have a format that they follow, especially when it has to do with reviewing like specific tools. So it's things like, I want like a bullet list of features. I want to make sure that we're including like the pricing where it starts. I want an image that's representative. I want comparisons to other tools. So I think it helps if you're going to go that route to create standards around it so that it's kind of like representative of you whenever you share it. And then people can understand why they would want to read your list posts over others. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, for sure. The only other quick question, hopefully it's quick, is do we have to consider formatting? You talked about formatting with bullets and things like that. Do we have to consider that differently, given that more people are probably digesting through phones and tablets than we would when people were basically using laptops and desktop computers?
Totally. So I think the first part of answering this question would refer to like even just the design of your page, thinking about if it's mobile and you have a sidebar, the sidebar is probably going to happen after your main content. So anything you put in the sidebar may or may not even get seen on mobile. And maybe you just want to get rid of it. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And then I think from more of like the post by post perspective, it's things like white space. Is there enough white space so that people aren't just like assaulted with a wall of text? And I think that's like, it's really like scary to people, if you see like just text and there's no line breaks, there's no bullet points or anything like that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to look for another blog to answer my question because that is just too much.
It's a little much, right?
We'll talk about a couple other formatting things that would apply as well throughout, but I think those points are worth sharing for sure. So here's a tip for finding ideas for content. And it's a little bit more advanced. So this whole presentation, this whole talk is something that like anyone from beginner to advanced could take stuff from. So kind of, like attack it at the level you're at, right? And then revisit it later with the slides or with the recording as you're ready to add new things to your process. But don't get overwhelmed. I just wanted to give a couple different things to think about. So the screenshot that you see here is a content gap analysis. And basically what a content gap analysis is you take your competitors. So I guess it's related to the previous slide and that we were talking about competition, but take your competitors and your blog, you plug in all the URLs and basically see what they're ranking for that you're not ranking for, but that you could potentially steal based on metrics like domain authority, which is again more into like the advanced side of this presentation. But domain authority or domain rating, as Ahrefs would call it, which is where the screenshot is from, is just the measure of your website's authority based on things like the backlinks that are pointing to it from other websites, from other relevant websites. And so there might be something that your competition is ranking for that you could easily steal. And so that's what what the point of this tool and report is. And even if you're not using Ahrefs is my tool of choice. But again, this is like my whole job, SEO content. So for me, it makes sense to pay for this tool. And it starts at like $100 a month. Same with SEMrush and same with Moz, which are other tools that I believe offer the same functionality. But I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's not so much the tool that you need to worry about with doing something like this. It's more the functionality, and you might be able to find this on, a lower priced SEO tool if SEO isn't your full job like it is mine. So talking about ideas, other things that I do to think of ideas when I'm stuck are things like listening to podcasts, reading books in the industry, going to conferences, RIP for now, but they'll be back. And, not just listening to the talks that are happening. That's a great source of ideas, but also like the conversation. What are other people talking about? What are they excited about? Those could be really great blog topics. It's also like when you're at work, like listening to colleagues, what are the things that they get excited about or that they have questions about? Questions is a great focus for any kind of content. And then, maybe you subscribe to like different industry newsletters. You can see what they're talking about. And then we'll talk about this in more detail later, but, plugging topics into Google and seeing what Google's data shares that might be questions that are unanswered. So all of those are great sources of ideas if you are stuck, or if you're just, it's a good idea to kind of be a student of your industry in general, because then you'll have an endless supply of topic ideas as you think about them. What was the other thing I was going to say about this? Oh, I was going to say that it's not just your industry that can inspire you. So I was on a call the other day where somebody was talking about how his friend read this book about like, creating like an industrial process or something, but that like had nothing to do with his business, but it was like his favorite book or something like that, because it taught him to think in a different way. And so I think that's a good lesson for all of us, to take inspiration from other industries, because sometimes it's easy to get really boxed into our own and to not be able to see things without our own bias, basically. In order to act on the ideas you have, you got to write them down somewhere. You got to, curate your collection of ideas. And so it could be anything. A simple notebook is fine. I like Evernote because I can add tags. I can put it in certain notebooks. It's just easier to organize that information. I also use this tool called Rocketbook. And so basically what it is it's something that you could write on like a notebook. You have to use these like specific pens, because then at the end of the week, you can just use water and like wipe them down and reuse them. But it has a tool or an app, I should say, where you can scan the pages and transcribe them. So it's just like, what works for you, basically. I like Evernote and I like Rocketbook when I'm feeling a little bit more analog. But for you, it could just be a simple notebook. It's up to you.
I bought one of those Rocketbooks for my best friend for Christmas. She loves it. Yeah, she's an organizer, so I'm good for organization.
Definitely. So I guess kind of a side note is to say that for all the tools that I'm going to mention, there's probably another tool that'll work just fine. It's really not about the tools at all. I do really love Ahrefs. I'm just going to put that out there. But there are a lot of other tools that can do the same basic things that Ahrefs does. Okay, so another example of something that you can fit into whatever tools you use is your system for how you organize all these ideas. Because I don't think it's enough to just write them down. It's not easy to use them if they're just all on the same page and they don't have any level of organization. So I use just Notion. I just built like an editorial calendar in there. And as you can see here, the different columns are things like just basic ideas and stuff that's in progress, where maybe I've started to do research, or, maybe I've created an outline or something, but it's not ready to review. It's not ready to take to the next step yet. In review is something where like maybe I do have a working draft, but, I still need to edit it, or, maybe there's a section missing or something like that. Update needed is something that I've worked on in the past and published, but maybe I need to revisit because the stats are out of date, or, something like that. And then publish is just the column for stuff that's done. So that's one way to organize it. I would say another good thing to keep in mind is categories, because you don't want to only be publishing about one category all the time. Like, on my blog, I share things about like software tool reviews. And it's like, if I posted that every single week, I think people would be pretty fatigued by that. So you got to mix it up. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that shortly. But I think the most important takeaway for how you would build your own editorial calendar that works for you is just find a tool with a Kanban or Kanban. I have no idea how to say that. View. It's like GIF and GIF, it's really user preference, I think.
It's probably not as contentious as GIF and GIF, though.
Yeah, I don't think people care as much. But so yeah, the point being that like you could do this on Trello, you could do this on Asana, you could do this in Google Sheets probably. And actually HubSpot, if you search HubSpot content calendar or editorial calendar, you will find a very beautiful Google Sheets template for free. I have recommended it in the past. So, you don't even have to build it yourself. You could take inspiration from something else. So once you have ideas, let's talk about how you start to flesh them out and do some research. So it helps to start by defining what is an expert resource, like what is a high quality resource or external link that you could add to your content. So you want to be thinking in terms of like, are they well known in the industry? So I write for Search Engine Journal, and I do it because it helps to associate me with other SEO experts. And it's also a great resource for whenever I'm looking for things to link in content about SEO. Social Media Examiner would be a really good example of something that I might use if I'm talking about social media stuff. So it's like, what are these news publications that are generally considered to be high authority? The information should also be timely. And I think this also depends on the specific topics that you're writing about. So a good example would be stuff in SEO changes all the time in digital marketing. So I want stuff that's relevant or, last updated, published within probably a year, maybe two. It depends on the topic. When I'm creating new content, I want it to be as relevant as possible. And when we get into things like, what are Instagram's daily active users, like that changes quarterly, monthly, daily, so if I'm quoting a stat from 2016, it's already way irrelevant. But if I'm talking about something in digital marketing that's more about psychology and some, landmark study that happened 20 years ago, I'm probably okay to still use that because not necessarily much has changed in human psychology since then. So it's like, know your topic, know your audience, know your industry, and use that as your guideline. But really, is the best practice, use timely information whenever possible. And then, the last thing, and Google expands a lot on this in their quality rater guidelines, which is a document that they share with these human quality raters who are going through search results and saying like, is this high quality? Does this meet the needs of the searcher? So they talk a lot about that. And it's not that these things are official ranking factors, but they are things that Google uses to fine tune their algorithm. Is this thing called EAT, and it's all about, I always forget what the E is, but it's about like authoritativeness, trustworthiness. Are you looking it up right now, Michelle? So, but it's related to reputation. And so they talk a lot about this in the Google quality rater guidelines and different ways that you can demonstrate reputation with things like reviews or even like well-moderated comments and things like that. But it's important to think about, like, does your website have a good reputation, or, the outlets that you're writing for? And if not, that might actually work against them when it comes to being recommended in relevant search results. So all things to think about when you're looking for sources and just doing research in general and what you should really listen to. So we've talked a little bit about this in terms of idea generation, but if you are writing within a certain niche, definitely helps to follow these like high quality blogs and not even necessarily blogs that you would want to submit content to, but that are the news sources like Search Engine Journal, like Social Media Examiner, because those are great potential sources that you'll probably need to use if you're talking about timely topics. And they can also help to inspire different topics. So one thing that comes to mind in talking about research is certain things come up over and over again. So like a stat that like I would frequently quote is something like, Google did some research where, if a website takes more than 3 seconds to load, then, the majority of people are going to bounce before going to another page. And so that's something that it would be nice to have that stat, the source link or whatever, easily accessible, because I know I'm going to keep referencing that. And so that's, again, why it's useful to have a system for taking notes and for curating ideas. You could also use that system to curate stats that you need to refer back to frequently. And Evernote is what I use for that. And again, you can add tags like, this is, a UX stat. This is a website design stat, something like that, performance. One thing that's important to do if you're creating content for a blog that has a lot of content already is make sure that they haven't already covered this content before. And if you have a big blog, you might forget the stuff that you've already covered. So it's a good tip for that too. So you basically just use the search operator, whatever the topic is in quotation marks, and then cite semicolon, whatever the URL of the website is. I would say that it's helpful if we're talking about blog content here to also add, /blog, whatever the subdomain or subdirectory is that the blog content is held in, so that you're not accidentally searching through static top level pages. It'll just make the search cleaner and easier. This is an especially pro tip, I would say, if you are submitting guest posts to another blog. So maybe it's not something that you're getting paid for, but you're trying to create a relationship, you're trying to create a good impression. The editor is certainly not going to appreciate if you're pitching things to them that they've already seen. And I can tell you, I get emails every day from people that are like, I want to do a guest post on your blog. And this is despite the fact that I have disclaimers everywhere that say that I don't accept them. But at any rate, you would think that the people who would be sending those emails would have enough foresight to get the topic right, or, do a little bit of research. I think,
or even just read.
Right. That would also be helpful. But, I think I got something about limousine services the other day, and it's like, what? So do your research, because it's harder for me to delete those emails where it's totally relevant versus the limousine services. So, and talking about research, and especially, looking at what competitors are doing, because it is an important part of this process. First of all, don't just copy another article. We've already talked about this a little bit. You want to have your own unique spin. Otherwise, why are you creating new content? Another tip is, before you start looking at those competitors, start to create your article outline and structure so that you're not sort of tempted by what other people are saying. And it's okay to draw inspiration from them. It's just not okay to have an article that looks exactly the same. The other thing is, when I'm looking at other articles for inspiration, I'm mostly looking at things like statistics, or, did they interview someone interesting and they have good quotes? So those are the things that I'm trying to take from those articles, more so than the actual ideas behind them. So just a couple of tips to help avoid plagiarism and, make sure your content is truly unique. Another way that you can create something that's really, really unique is to conduct an expert interview, or an expert roundup, or to interview topic experts. So when I'm working with new clients and it's a topic that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, or, people on my team don't have a lot of experience with, I'll ask, if we were to work together, will I have access to an expert on your team, like a subject matter expert? And what I'll do is conduct some interviews over Zoom. We'll agree on the topic ahead of time, and I'll come prepared with some questions, and we might diverge from them during that interview. But that's a great way to take what's in somebody else's head and, add your value of being the writer and being the translator for that end user who might not understand, the technical terms this person is using, but you can understand them by asking questions and getting to the root of it. So that's an awesome way to not just add to the void, talk to an expert and communicate what they say. So let's talk about outlining. Outlining, basically the goal is that you want to include everything that you need to set you up for success when you're drafting. And for me, this is I don't want to have to use the internet while I'm drafting. I should have every link I need, every explanation I need. And the reason is because when I first started working, or earlier on in my freelance career, I would do a lot of writing while traveling and stuff like that, or visiting my family. And, I would be on a bus or train or plane, and I just wanted to get stuff done while I was in transit so I could enjoy, my end destination. But I think the other thing is that it helps to avoid distractions, because it's so easy to get distracted by shiny things when you're writing. I think our tendency is to just like drag out that process as long as possible, even though it's not necessarily what we want. So that's the point of that. When I'm outlining, here are some things that I include. This is kind of like the main thing, and to kind of give you some actionable takeaways for you to add to your own process. So it's to create a brief. And I think this is probably most important if you're working on a team with other people, to make sure everybody's on the same page. But I think it helps for you too, just to get your mind in the right place. So here's an example that I created for a client, an emergency vet, and it includes things like the specific category on their blog. So we talked about this earlier, having different categories. And the reason why you want to focus on a good spread, and an editorial calendar helps to make sure that you're doing this well by being able to physically see, like, what am I posting this month? Is it different categories? How about next month? And so categories for me, part of it, it's also the topic and the keyword too, but they help you define the specific stage in the buyer's journey that you're trying to address with the content. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but there's different types of search intent. There's, people who are early on in figuring out they have a problem and are evaluating solutions, or somebody who's ready to buy right now. And the way that you structure your content in terms of the keywords you go after and the way you write it can address those different people. So that's all I'll say for now. We'll get back to that. It's also things like, when I'm writing a brief, I do want to include a primary keyword and any other keywords that might be relevant, secondaries. And we'll talk about some Google search features that will give you keyword ideas that would also be really useful to include here. The point being that you need it during the outline stage, because that keyword research will, to a large extent, dictate the structure of your content. So you don't want to end with keyword research. This is why you start with it. It's also just like, what specific information do we want to make sure we address? Is there anything we want to make sure we don't address, like a competitor or something might be something, or, if a client provides this to you, they might be wanting to make clear, like something might come up in your research and they might want you to avoid that because it's not relevant or something like that. And then also it's useful to have research material so that when somebody is taking this, like if you're writing it for another person, so that they understand kind of what your mindset was, what's content that relates to this topic, so that I can make something that addresses it in the way you want it addressed. So those are a couple things. Sometimes I'll include a feature image, because I do have an editorial calendar service where I'm creating this for clients. And so I do that for them specifically, just because, again, it helps to create like a more complete brief, basically. But if I was just doing this for someone on my team, I probably wouldn't do that.
If you have a blog and you accept guest posts, then you also want to make sure that you do this in reverse, right? So you want to make sure, really read, look at the links, because let's say you're Coca-Cola, you don't want somebody referencing Pepsi in your blog, and you published it, so you need to be careful about all those kinds of things.
And I think in terms of talking about like web hosts, another thing that comes up a lot is linking out to affiliates. So it's like sending traffic their way, and then they have an affiliate link for the host that they send back, and it's like, we just double paid for that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good to have some sort of policy around links in general and what to include, but taking it a step further, like, who do you consider your competitors, or who are those affiliates that we don't want to send traffic to, because it's already their job to send traffic to us. So there's so many ways to think about it, but being clear about what you want and don't want is really where it starts, I would say.
Exactly. And I always have a policy that I reserve the right to edit anything before it goes live.
Totally. That's a good
because it's my blog. Yep.
Yeah. I do the same thing with accepting sponsored posts on my website. So I have the policy also that, like, I have to write it because I want to have control. And maybe I would change that in the future. I don't know. But yeah, ultimately, like, they have the ability to edit it with me, but I'm going to be the one to approve it.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So I I use these tools, Phrase and ClearScope, both help me to essentially reverse engineer high ranking content. So both of these tools work by taking the top, I want to say like 10 to 30 search results, and they run it through this Google like machine learning tool thing where it takes out these entities. The entities are just nouns, people, places, things. But the nouns, they're kind of like secondary semantic keywords. So that's what you can see on this image here on the right sidebar. Those are like the entities that it's suggesting based on whatever primary keyword I feed it. And, basically telling me if I'm using those things effectively. And both of these tools can tell you if an entity should be present in the heading versus just the body content. So from an SEO content perspective, these are really useful. There is another tool, and it's currently on AppSumo. So I tweeted this out under my link to my slides. It's called Market Muse, and it has the same sort of like content optimization functionality where you would feed it like a primary keyword, and you could copy and paste the content from, like a working Google Doc or an existing blog post or whatever. And then it'll tell you, are you including these entities ideally, or, is there more optimization you could do? And it suggests the phrases that you should use. So 3 tools that you could use to improve your SEO content process, with one of them currently running on a mega deal on AppSumo right now. So I would totally suggest that. But I would say of the 3, my favorite is ClearScope. And in my workflow, I use Phrase as more of like a brief, and ClearScope is more of like the end optimization. But ClearScope actually now has an automated outline generator where it says like, here's some suggested headings or the starts of those headings, and here's what we would expect to see covered under them. So it's really cool. They're constantly iterating new features. And again, it is one of the more expensive tools, but I'm not looking back at this point. It's so useful. It's worth the money because of the time it would save you to do this stuff yourself. So in talking about creating the outline, another thing that you could include at this stage or during the draft is the metadata. I think it's a nice extra touch for any writer to add a suggested meta title and description, because these are the things, like, even if you're not uploading it to the client's content management system for them, they can just copy and paste. They don't have to think about it. And, if the point is that you're creating content to help them rank in relevant search, you really got to finish, you like close the loop on what those pieces are. I've actually heard conflicting viewpoints about if you should have a separate page title from this like meta SEO title. So somebody recently told me that if you click through and it has a different title, that might confuse people. But I like to have different ones because I can optimize for the human versus the search spider. So I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. Intro, you want to share a problem, solution, and what's called the reveal. So the reveal is like how you're going to address the solution. Different sections that you'll want to include in the outline. You'll want to have subheadings and then just like bullet points. Don't try to like flesh out everything right now. I try to add a new section every 300 words or so, and just include the main points that you want to make sure to cover and any relevant stats or links. The conclusion, you're basically just restating the problem, summarizing the key points, and ending with a call to action. So these are a couple calls to action that you might want to include. Things like tweet your thoughts or leave a comment. If you have a product that's relevant, buy this product, or maybe start a trial, book a demo, get in touch. A couple extras you might opt to include are things like the Twitter handles of any articles that you mentioned, any sources, or any experts you interviewed. Some specific image options. Make sure to add source information just so that everybody's on the same page about that. And I also like to call out the internal and external links that I use. This is more so in the drafting stage, but I'm just saying it here because it's part of something I'm going to share with you in a moment. So don't just copy and paste information when you're like looking at source material, like a quote or a stat or whatever, or something that you're going to use, but you want to paraphrase. I like to highlight that in red if it's like a direct quote as a visual reminder that I need to change it. And don't waste time calling out the obvious. This is kind of hard to explain, but you'll start to notice it if you think with this in mind when you're editing your own stuff. So here's my blog outline template, and you'll see like all the things that I've mentioned on it. So we'll talk quickly about how to add engaging visuals, because essentially if your draft is just text, like you failed the process. There needs to be more than that. And the goal is to not get sued by using things that are not royalty free and to be compelling. Here are a couple stock photo sites. The best of the best free sites, I would say, are like Pexels and Unsplash. But if this is something that you do for your job or that you're investing in for your business, you really need like a paid stock photo subscription, just because people see the stuff from Pexels and Unsplash and they get fatigued by it, I think, because they see it all the time. So if you have a paid subscription, there's less of a chance of people using that all the time. Other people will use it, but it might be in different industries, for example. And here's a couple. I think Envato Elements is probably my favorite. So a couple legal to use image ideas. I'll just run through some examples. A GIF. GIFs are fun. They make you stop. They're engaging. You can find a lot of options on Giphy. I don't think I've looked anywhere else for them. Some sort of relevant YouTube video. The thing that's really cool about video is like it gets people to stay on your page longer when they click on them, and it doesn't have to be your video. It just has to be related. Branded statistics are great. I think most brands that put these on their blogs want them to be shared because they have like a watermark on them, but you could also look at stuff like Statista, or you could create your own branded statistics. Having, like, if you do expert roundups, creating like an on-brand image template for them. You know, you don't have to go as far as creating like a caricature character here, but just making sure it's on brand is a good way to add value. I also like in writing like listicles, for example, having examples to prove your point. This is one from an article about like shipping confirmation emails or something like that. And then also adding screenshots with annotations, especially in the WordPress world, because, you know, we're trying to explain concepts and we want to be as obvious and direct as possible. And then in talking about branded statistics and just on-brand stuff for customers, I, in the past year or so, opened up a Design Pickle account, and it's just been really a nice value add for my clients to be able to submit, like, you know, tables and then having them make them beautiful, because tables aren't really good for SEO anyway. So a couple of best practices for when you're adding images to your page, and this is something, or these are things you should do for every image. Make sure they're high quality. They shouldn't be fuzzy. Add sources and captions and alt text, and the alt text shouldn't just be the keyword. It should explain it for people who are using screen readers. Make sure that you're using the keyword that's said in the file name and alt tag. So the best way to do it is to use the keyword in a descriptive way. Okay, so then a brand style guide has been something that has made it possible for my team to create high quality content that is consistently, you know, like on brand for the Blogsmith, because working with multiple different people, from writers to editors and so on, you need some sort of document, you know, standardization. Or if your blog, you know, works with lots of writers or guest posters, you really should invest some time in this, with the goal being to produce consistent high quality content. So a couple of just like quick tips for formatting, and this will answer the question of the person who was asking about mobile stuff too, is sentences should be short. If they are more than 2 lines, it's a run-on sentence, and paragraphs should be 3 lines or less. And this will really help with creating that white space. And, you know, it starts to look a little bit like that LinkedIn broetry, you know, when you have like one line. I think the key is to have different lengths, right? Like, it's not, they're all this way. It's like they differ, but within these boundaries. So like bullet points are another great formatting tool. You want to think in terms of skimmability with everything you do, with the headings. So like here, we're talking about like descriptive headings and anchor text just being the text that when you add a link is like what you would see instead of the link. And those things should describe what I would expect in that section or when clicking through. And that helps you skim. adding descriptive words, defining a specific perspective. So like consistently using first, second, or third person. I'm sharing about my experience, or, I'm talking to you about your problem. So like I, we, you, whatever it is, just be consistent. And then also avoid cliches. This is easier said than done, but I will give you some guidelines for doing this in just a moment. So a sort of advanced tip, again, if this is like your whole life, like me, is to get a subscription to the AP style book. I think it's like $20 a year or something like that. And it's like a 600 page, guideline, but you don't have to read it. It's just to reference basically. And so I'm also giving you a link here to my style guide. So in terms of what I was just saying about like how to use words and how to avoid cliches, go here because I've probably already talked about it. Okay, so we'll just quickly go through stuff like when you're writing the draft, just start. It's easier to do that when you have done the work with the outline. It's harder to start with a blank page. Don't overthink it. If there's a word that you just like can't figure out, just add a placeholder so you can move on and you can come back during edits. And then the Pomodoro method has been really effective for me to do like 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. Just make sure you're doing the break as well as the work. But again, if you have a good outline, it's going to be easy to just like knock stuff out. If you're self-editing, do a once over just to find like spelling and grammar stuff. I also like to read the text out loud during a separate edit so that I can hear, whatever my brain won't tell me because of my own bias towards my own writing. And then I also ask, like, is it interesting? Like, did it actually address what the reader would really want to know? We'll go through this really quick. So I have my keyword research process. If you want to dive into that deeper, this resource, it's a paid resource, but it's under $50. Going through mine. But a couple of things that I can share with you that you don't need to pay for a tool to use is to go into Google search, type whatever your keyword is, and look at Google autocomplete suggestions, searches related to, which is like after you hit enter at the bottom of the page. And then people also ask. That people also ask is a gold mine because questions are kind of the future of search. And featured snippets are why. So featured snippets are the top organic result during search. You can see there's 2 ads and then there's this featured snippet. And featured snippets rank ahead of any other search results, basically, because they are structured to answer a question. And I don't want to get too much into that just because it's a little bit more advanced, but just something to think about. And so we've talked about search intent. Navigational is like Facebook log, and it's somebody who's like looking for a specific part of a website. It's probably not worth optimizing for those terms, but it is a sign that something's wrong if those are coming up in like your Google Search Console, like somebody's having trouble with access to your website. Informational is how-to queries. So these are people who are kind of like beginning, middle of the buyer's journey. But they're great to optimize for because they're the most searched queries, how to. And then transactional is like, top 10 TVs for 2021 or comparison of like this SaaS tool to that. So it's like people are actively looking for an answer and they're ready to buy. And that's why you want to construct your content calendar to address these different things. So I think I'm just going to run through these like super quick. Use your keyword in your URL slug, because that's like one of the biggest like signals to Google of relevance. Make sure to use it in your meta description, but it's really more important that your meta description is actually compelling because it's kind of like the teaser to your article. Your subheadings, you want to try to incorporate your primary and secondaries when possible keywords here because they're another good signal to Google. I try to avoid heading tags less than or greater than, I should say, heading 3. So like heading 4 through heading 6 is just subcategories of subcategories. And you start to get to like a run-on blog post if you're getting to like heading 6. So you might want to consider splitting it at that point. And descriptive subheadings to me include 3 to 5 words. It's a good guideline. A one-word subheading is not going to help anybody. And then obviously you want to use your keyword in your content, but I would say that it's less important now to like use it a certain amount of times. I mean, there are guidelines, but if you use it once per 500 words, I think that's like the bare minimum. And then here's just some strategies that have worked for me. If I have like an awkward keyword, I'll Use it in the introduction, like, let's talk about keyword. And then at the end, I'll have like a conclusion that says final thoughts, whatever my SEO title was. And I've already optimized that to include the keyword, so I know it's covered. And then, share your thoughts about keywords. So those are just a couple ways you could fit it in. And then really quick, a couple content promotion ideas are like, first of all, make sure you have social share buttons on your site. Add click to tweet call outs for like those quotes and stats and other cool takeaways. Add a Pinterest image and if possible, like an open graph tag for Pinterest. But Pinterest is like the second highest social referral of traffic to websites. There are like no WordPress brands on it, which blows my mind. So like this is such a great opportunity if you're a WordPress brand. And then Open Graph is just like the title and text you would see when sharing something on Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest. So take some time to set that. You might want to add some social share copy to your draft for your client as an extra nice thing. And then Missing Letter and Q Promoter, two tools that I use to help with social media, both for my channels and to submit to other people's. And then a couple just other ideas that you could look at are things like tweeting at everybody that you grab the Twitter handles for pitching to different newsletters. This is like an awesome tactic for WordPress brands that is very underutilized. And, other things you can look over later. This is just a kind of a last thought, which is make sure somebody's waiting for your blog post before you publish it. Tease it, talk about like how you put it together, like what are some of the different things that you explored, and so like Rand Fishkin does a good job of this. And okay, I'm done.
Wow, we try to pack as much into like just under an hour as we possibly can. This is so much. We're gonna have to have you back to dig deeper in some of these subcategories because there's just so much good stuff to cover.
There's a lot to keep in mind when it comes.
There really is. Now I'm going to use a new feature that I hope I did it right. Let's see if I can get this up. There we go. Look, it worked. I want to say thank you so much for being here. You can find Maggie at theblogsmith.com and on Twitter at Maddy Osman. And all of her, the link to these slides are there. And I know Maddy, she's probably more than happy to answer questions via Twitter. So, use her at Maddy Osman. Go ahead and tweet out to her. And use her business. If you're not wanting to create blog posts for yourself, Maddy's got a great business going over there.
If you don't want to follow all these steps, I already got it down.
She's got it down, and she's available to create some awesome content for you. I always say, if it's not your core competence, hire somebody to do it. Like if you were a restaurateur and you don't know how to write a blog post, get somebody to write your blog post and do your social for you, because that's just going to benefit you. We do have more webinars in the future. I think next month we're going to be talking to Vito Pellig. They just renamed their company, so I can't remember exactly what it's called. Aratim, maybe? Yeah, Adarim. I think it's Adarim. And so I think we're going to have him here next month. I just have to finalize the details on that. But you can always visit centurycares.org to stay in the loop and follow us on Twitter at centuryhost. Maddy, thank you so much for being here today. Truly appreciate it. And we'll follow up with you. And hopefully we'll see a blog post on our blog from you in the near future as well. We'll talk about that some more. Until then, we'll see everybody next month.